pop up. I appreciate your patience. So, let me start over. Today is January 27th, 2021. Today's class, we're going to be, basically over the next year, I'm going to be doing a monthly course, a self-mastery course of basically becoming aware and knowing yourself well enough so that you can become more effective and accomplish more of what you're trying to accomplish. Every great person that I have had the pleasure to meet, without exception, is in some form or another a self-mastery person. They're a student of self-mastery, they might be a master of self-mastery, but they're constantly looking at themselves and constantly evaluating what's going on because they're so aware of all the biases and all of the ways that we fool ourselves. So if you were to take let me share with you really quick here. This is a list of biases that are over on Wikipedia. So if you were to look up cognitive biases on Wikipedia, you would see that these are all the different cognitive biases that are currently going on, that they're currently aware of. These cognitive biases all have an influence on how you think and how you operate. So I'll give you an example. One of them, I'm not sure what the bias is called, but I use it in sales a lot. When I go to give a proposal, whatever the number may be, if it's 250,000 or 20,000 or 2 million, whatever the number may be, I'm always going to start the talk with, let's say it's a $250,000 proposal. I'm going to say, well, the good news is it's not $2 million. Now, the reason why I'm doing that is called price conditioning. I'm actually setting up, and it plays on a bias. I'm actually setting up a larger number before you hear my number, so that as you hear my number, relatively you think that, oh, it's not that bad of a number. And this doesn't even have to be, I could have asked you what the last 4 digits of your Social Security were, and that will still influence the price that's coming. This is how strong biases are. If we were to take a look at, someone created a great graphic. Let me see if I can pull it up here. This graphic here is it's a phenomenal breakdown of the biases and the different sort of categories that they play in. But just look how many are there. And how many biases are you aware of that you're currently working through yourself? And this is really the key, is that if you, this is what self-mastery is about. It's this sort of, the process of self-doubt, right, is really critical to have any kind of true intuition, right? So many of us make so many of our decisions, well, all of us actually, make all of our decisions off of feeling. And I'll tell you how I know this. The part of the brain that's responsible for feeling, the limbic region, when the limbic region is damaged, in 100% of patients, they have one thing they cannot do, among others, but one that's common. They cannot make a decision. In other words, without the capacity to feel, you can't make a decision. And if your intuition and your feeling can be affected and altered by the biases that you have, then it very well could be that a lot of the decisions that you're making are actually being influenced by factors that are currently outside of your control because they're outside of your awareness. And so really this class is about, yes, it's self-mastery, but it's really about self-awareness. Really becoming aware, offering yourself the proper amount of doubt. I mean, I don't want to doubt my capabilities, but I do want to doubt my beliefs, because my beliefs are what keeps me from achieving whatever it is that I'm wanting to achieve. And so as we walk through this next 12 months, what I'm really hoping to do is create create a toolbox, so to speak, that you're able to use as you're operating through life. Many of you know that I've been in sales for a long time. I've had leadership positions. I've been responsible for motivating people. And sometimes motivating people is not, it's not like, hey, let's go. Sometimes I have to use, the biases and the different things against those people. And if they're not aware of them, it becomes quite easy. if they're aware of their own biases, actually I don't have to do any of that. And they start to be able to understand that there's this, I want to say the quantum of mind, or maybe quantum of mentality. I'm not sure what the process is, but long story short, or what the name would be, but if you think about it, we do not process information like we speak. It's not linear, one A, B, C, D, E. We don't process it that way. I know many people read that way because they were taught to read out loud. But the speed readers, they don't read out loud. They just look at the paragraph and they absorb the paragraph, so to speak. They can see it all and they're able to process it. And you do this too, whether you know it or not. If you drive a car or even ride a bike, what you'll recognize is if you're driving down the road, you're not really paying attention to any single thing. There's lots of information that's going on that you're processing. The speed of the car, the speed limit, the cars around you, the people around you, the weather. There's so many different variables. And then when one of those variables, let's say a ball rolls up in front of the car, all of a sudden your attention collapses to that moment, just like the quantum fields. And so this is really, when you have a toolbox and you have an awareness and you have some techniques that you're able to use and you start to have a behavior that is incorporating these techniques into your life, what happens is that you're giving yourself lots of tools to be able to navigate as you're driving through whatever it may be. So this is really what the idea of self-mastery is. And put it this way, when you trust your intuition and you haven't done the self-doubt, all kinds of damages for you and other people can occur. And so really it's in everyone's interest for self-mastery, but not everyone's interested in it. And as we walk through this course, I want to say that the willingness to be wrong is a really critical aspect of, to be okay that it's wrong. And I know a lot of us have, it's never fun. There's a little bit of sting, a little bit of humility when we're wrong, and pretend on, how big of the consequence of when we're wrong. But when we can admit when we're wrong, and when we can see that we're wrong, really some magic starts to happen. I recently worked with a guy that I don't think I ever heard him once say he was wrong. And while he thought he had really great interpersonal skills, it was apparent that he didn't. And no matter what I tried to show him, or I tried however I tried to position it, because he didn't come from a position of, well, maybe I could be wrong. He could never really hear what I was saying. And there's a lot of power in being wrong. They've done tests like with robots and different things along those lines where they're humanoid robots and they'll have the humanoid robot intentionally make mistakes. And they found in the groups of, there'll be like 4 people working together, one of them being the robot. And they found in the groups where there's 4 were working together, where the robots made a mistake, they tended to be, the groups tended to be lighter. They became friendlier. People were more willing to make mistakes and try things. And as well, the end product was typically much better than what the other groups had produced. In another scenario where people didn't know they were working with a robot, they just thought they were working with someone online, same scenario, it would make a mistake, it would admit its mistake. And not only did it affect the group that it happened to be involved with, but they noticed that the other interactions that the group had with other groups spilled over into those other groups as well. So, mind you, evolutionarily wise, there's a reason why being wrong sort of feels funny, right? It feels like it stings a little bit. 10,000 years ago, while we're running the plains of Africa, being wrong could mean you were dead. Being wrong could mean a loss of resources. Not understanding weather patterns, or being, there was a serious consequence for being wrong. We're not in that same situation any longer, but yet we're still going to have that evolutionary response. And again, if we can be aware that this is an evolutionary response that we're having to a situation when we feel wrong, then it's much easier to be able to acknowledge it, accept it, and fix it. Obviously, if we can't admit we're wrong, then we can't fix anything that may be wrong. So the we're going to get into some transactional analysis, but from a very, I want to say, it's a very introductory type of view and what's happening here. Basically, the transactional analysis is extremely complicated. It has tons of variables and we're going to talk about it throughout this whole next year. We're going to get into it a lot deeper than what we do today. But it's really, transactional analysis helps us become aware of our inner world. You know, we live in two worlds. We live in an outer world and we live in an inner world. My outer world, I can, gravity. It's very opposite. I can count how many pages are actually in this book. Very easy for me to make measurements and things along those lines. Inner world, a little different. I can't, how do you measure hope? How do I measure depression? How do I evaluate anything? They're two different worlds, and we can't really apply the rules and the laws of the outer world with the rules and the laws of the inner world. And this is some of what I was speaking to earlier, to the quantumness of mind. We can take a look and use Newtonian physics to the large objects that we have and that we're manipulating. But at its core level, of course, there's quantumness going on. And this is sort of the same with us. Our inside world does play a connection to the outside world. It is connected. But most people's inside world is busy reacting to their outside world. What we want to do is have the tools and the awareness so that when we can, we have our outside world reacting to our inside world. And this is really what this, TA is going to start bringing us, is our sort of, it's going to help us categorize and catalog our own feelings and how they play out in transactions with others. The mind is a prankster. I mean, I don't know if you feel this way, but there'll be times when I feel like I've got something mastered, just to peel back another layer of the onion and cry a little more and figure out that I didn't. And so my mind will oftentimes deceive my perception. Again, going to these biases really becomes a problem. And when I can start to understand that I need to make my mind a servant, that it's not really my master. I can't be given away to, if every desire I have or every pleasure I want or every emotion that I might feel, I just give into. I obviously am going to have some problems and some issues and things along those lines. And unfortunately, in our lives, we do have sides of ourselves or eyes that do exactly that. They play the victim card, or they give into emotion, or they give into negative emotion. And as we work through this course, and it plays out in TA as well, we're going to talk about, I call it multiple eyes. The idea is this isn't like multiple eyeballs, but multiple personalities, so to speak. We all have multiple eyes within ourselves. We have, for example, if I set my alarm tonight for, wake up an hour early to go jogging tomorrow morning, I can guarantee you the guy waking up tomorrow morning is not going to feel the same way as the guy who set the alarm. Those are two different eyes that come in. And these eyes, they play out in different ways. For me, I have been able to label my eyes on the inside using the TA code based, so to speak, so that I can actually have communication that's effective with those eyes, so I can actually solicit some real change in behavior around them. So I'm going to jump into some TA here really quick. Let me get on my, let me pull up what I need to pull up here. We got, I think slide 1. And let's go to media player. All right, as you can see here, there's 3 different ego states that are basically referred to, or the base ego states that are in transactional analysis. Really quick, transactional analysis was created by a guy by the name of Eric Byrne. Eric Byrne, in my mind, he was a genius. But in the late 50s, he released a book called Games People Play. It actually is an excellent book. I highly suggest it. It codifies all kinds of different games and shows, and a game being, we're going to talk a little bit more about a cross transaction between two people and the process it gets to that cross transaction. But the theory is this, is that when you were a small child, infant, you were born into this world, and you had no sense of reason, right? All you had was you didn't have any logic, you didn't have any reason, all you had was feeling. You had a full spectrum of feeling. And as things would occur, we need feeling, we need emotional strokes as much as we need food. A good example is the orphanages in Romania. When they outlawed abortion over there 20, 30 years ago, of course the orphanages became overrun, and these children weren't held, they weren't touched, and they weren't given any emotional strokes. And they literally have not developed. Many of them can't speak. And so you need emotional and feeling strokes as much, if not maybe more, than you need food. And so I know that sounds crazy, but it is true. And so as a child, you're taking in all of these feelings and emotional strokes in your environment. Some of them are good, but some of them aren't. And you're learning from your parents, and you're learning the roles that you're supposed to play, and you're learning what they call injunctions, things that maybe you have an idea that you're not supposed to exist, or you're not supposed to speak. So there's all of this sort of, let's call it, emotionally psychic material that's going on in your childhood that is making up and forming your personality. What happens is we take these feelings and the event that's around them, and we create a belief. And if you have children, if you can remember in your childhood, oftentimes there would be no really logical connection between your belief and what had occurred, but it's what you believed. And as we develop, our sense of logic is really built off what we believe. And the sense of rationale that we use in the world is built off of that. And so a lot of what you believe and a lot of what's either helpful or hurtful in your life was picked up during this very small child period. Usually they say by 5. Most of the core stuff is there and it's happening. So this is really the idea of transactional analysis, is that we created our sense of being off of these feelings, and now as adults we go out and we find situations in which we can replay these feelings so that we can reaffirm to ourselves that the world is exactly how we assume it to be. So if you see here in the ego states that I have for you, the very top ego state is the parent state. The parent state is a state that what's the best way to say that? Basically, this is all the things you learn from your parents, right? This is the model that, you're gonna see. It could be a nurturing side, it could be a controlling side. So, I know for me, there's things I'll hear from it, when I say them, I'll realize that it's actually my dad or my mom saying it. So, like, Jesus. That's a term that I learned from my parents, and if I say it, it's like a one in the controlling side. I'm usually upset, and I'm saying it in some kind of expression. The nurturing parent also lives here, right? And if you know me and you've worked with me, you know that I'm big on the nurturing parent and the nurturing model. And we're going to talk a little bit about that nurturing model as an example later on today. But the nurturer is, it can be good or bad as well. Right, but these are, I wasn't raised with a nurturing mother. My birth mother was not very nurturing. The mother that came into my life when I was 8 was extremely nurturing, and I basically had to copy and mimic off of her and incorporate those into as I was an adult. But the parent ego state has many sort of ego states within it, but it's a collection of ego states and behaviors that we typically learn from our parents. The one on the bottom is the child state. And the child state, of course, can be complementary to the parent state, but oftentimes the child is, again, usually in some form or another, is subject to the parent. So when you're in a child state, you're usually in a state of I don't want to say victimhood, but of being subject to someone else or feeling like you're subject to someone else, or there's a parent playing in that particular situation. So it might be like a rebel. It might be, screw you, I don't want to do that. Or it might be some type of like, you can't do something, you're really afraid of it and you can't get over it. Or it could be again on the fun side, you're having fun and a lot of intimacy plays out on this side. So as far as like between you and your spouse and those kinds of good things. So basically we have 3 different ego states that we're dealing with. This would be a high level. The adult state is really, that's the here and now. That's the respect, that's like the healthy processing of emotions. The adult is, as it implies, it sort of is the more mature, and it's, I want to say, transcended the binariness of the parent and child state. So when we come to this next slide here, we have, I break down the ego state segmentation a little bit further for you. Basically what's happening is if you take a look at the upper left, I have the controlling parent. And this is, again, I'm taking these ego states and dividing them into 2, but they actually could be divided into further, I can divide the nurturing parent down further as well and the controlling parent further down. And I'll show you that in an example here in a little bit. But if you look at the controlling parent, right, the good part of a controlling parent is they're usually constructive and they're very organized and they're structured and they give all that kind of structure that a child needs. Given too much of that can be autocratic and it can be very, very critical and even dismissive, and a lot of, let's say, negative injunctions that people carry with themselves for the rest of their life come out of the controlling parent. It's some child that heard the parent say something along the lines of they shouldn't exist. Now, as goofy as this is going to sound, it does play out. I know in myself, I have vivid memories of small childhood. I mean, like, crib childhood. And one of my memories is I was the 3rd child, and I remember my mother having to explain my existence on the phone to, I don't know if it was grandma or somebody else, but she was like having to make an excuse for having me. And I had calculated at the time that had created for me a don't exist injunction. In other words, a lot of my crazy and self-damaging behavior of my youth, a lot of it was coming from this injunction because I didn't really think I should be existing. And it was, again, a childhood thing. It's a little baby. I don't have a full sense of reasoning, a full sense of vocabulary. All I have is this sense of feeling and awareness of what's going on. I must have felt something in that space, and this is where this came out of. And I guarantee you have these as well. We all do. So the controlling parent, again, it can be a good or a bad thing. Nurturing parents the same way. As you can see, we can be very supportive, and we all like to be nurtured, but also can be smothering and overprotective and sort of invasive and not allow us our privacy. And the child is the same way. We have an adaptive child who's going to adapt to the parent, typically to, I want to say, the critical parent oftentimes. They're going to adapt depending on how the critical parent is coming out. They might be accommodating or cooperative. They may be rebellious. They might be compliant. But basically, there's going to be, the adaptive child is exactly as it states. It's adapting the free child's behavior into a behavior that's what it feels is a appropriate response to a particular parent in that situation. The free child is great too, creative, curious, playful, but it can also be problematic. When I was 18, I had no stop. I had a lot of free child. It was crazy, and it was just too much free child. I was always fun to be with, but until it got to that point when it was no more fun. And usually that was egocentric, wild, and inconsiderate going on. So as you can see, we've got these different sort of ego states that are going on at any given time. And they'll have different positions with these. They have complementary and crossed positions. And when we're talking about a complementary position, we're talking about a position that basically is congruent with whatever might be happening at that time. So if you look just on the screen, you'll see that I've got these two arrows going back and forth between a parent and a child. So let's say on the left is one person and their ego states, and on the right is another person and their ego states. On the left, the person is, let's say, in the parent role. They're saying something like, you know, you shouldn't have done that. I'm not very happy with what you've done. And of course, the child state, in this particular way, a complementary position, the child is going, I'm sorry, I won't do it again, some form of adaptive behavior to that critical parent. And so this actually is, this complementary transaction, the idea is what really drives my nurturing model. And we're going to close with the nurturing model so you guys can have an understanding of how it works and what it is and all that good stuff. But long story short, complementary positions are, when you start to understand complementary positioning, you can take a position in a situation with another person and, again, using biases and things they're not aware of, you're able to force them into the complementary position, whether they realize it or not. And this is really the idea of understanding transactional analysis. It's not only so that you could do that, but to really, and I think more importantly, is to understand when someone's doing it to you, right? You want to be able to have the outside world reacting to you. You don't want to be reacting to it. And understanding complementary transactions and complementary positioning is a big part of being able to do that. For this, the definition's simple. It's two roles that are complementary to each other. Parent-child, child-child, parent-parent, adult-adult. In the next slide, we have a cross transaction. And in a cross transaction, usually what happens is you have a situation where someone has said, oh, you shouldn't have done that. And instead of a complementary position being taken, the person actually takes a different parent position. It goes, don't tell me what to do, right? Now there's a conflict going on. And this is usually how you're able to recognize a cross transaction, is when there's a conflict going on, there's a few elements going on in it. But usually what's going on in a cross transaction is a game of some sort. And so, a game is really sort of the core element of, let's say, the trickier behavior that we do. Let me give you the good, well, I'll tell you really, if out on LinkedIn I have a post about stamp collecting. I don't know if you've read it or not. I think it's a great read, but go ahead but it really describes an idea like this. I don't know if I know in Minsk at Green, they have like the stickers that you put into a book, and Corona. I know in America, we used to have S&H Green stamps or Camel dollars or, reward points. But basically in the S&H Green stamp world, what you do is you'd get these stamps and you would lick them and you'd put them in a book. And then after you collected so many stamps, you were able to change it in for some type of plates, a trip, whatever it is, depending on how many stamps you had collected. Well, the idea in transactional analysis is very similar. What happens is that someone we're close to, we work with, our spouse, our children, whatever it might be, they start to irritate us a little bit. And rather than communicate and express to them our frustration, we take it and we put it in our book as a little stamp. And when we do that, we're really collecting stamps. And the same thing happens. After we get to X amount of stamps, it'll be 5 or 10 or 20, whatever it might be. Now that last stamp, we're entitled to an outrage. We can explode and freak out. And now we have the opportunity to be able to trade in for, that's the game, right? We took all these different transactions that we had, and we turned them into a much larger opportunity to get into outrage and roll on down that road. And so this is really, again, we're on a very high level here, and if any of you want to reach out to me, as you all know, at all times, you can reach out to me and we can discuss any particular situation you have. But we're going to come back and sort of break this whole game process down, because there's games that you're playing. There are negative emotions that you're addicted to. I promise, we all are. And when I say, well, why, when I start asking you, well, why do you like being angry? You're going to go, I don't like being angry. So-and-so makes me angry. But when you start to really break it down, for me, I understood that anger was something that I thought was good and useful and something that I thought I needed. And it wasn't until I became aware of how I was operating and how these transactions were occurring that it became a problem for me. As I said, we're going to come into this idea of the nurturing model. Now, a lot of you who have worked with me have heard this. I've been teaching this for 15 years. As soon as I realized it and understood it, and understood the power of it, I started to incorporate it in every part of my life. And I pretty much do it without thinking about it now. But the idea is that, you're born, the baby up on the left-hand side. That's your natural child state. You're happy, you're given warmth, you're given attention, you're given everything, food, all your needs are met. They call that the natural child state. And what provides that is nurturing parents. When you have nurturing parents, all that nurturing creates this sense of, like, Freud called it the oceanic state, some people refer to it as Shangri-La. It's the idea of perfect contentment, where we're feeling at one with ourselves and the universe. And this is that natural child state. But then what starts to happen is that baby becomes a little older. Baby starts to get mobile, and baby reaches for the electric outlet or the sharp object or the heavy object, whatever it may be that baby reaches out for. And all of a sudden, nurturing parent turns to critical parent. No, don't do that. We sometimes refer to this as the ogre or the witch, right? And when that happens, the baby who is in a natural child state, curious, checking things out, starts to cry. Ooh! They'll drop whatever's in their hand. They back up. They go into what they call adaptive child state. And they go into this adaptive child state so that they can solicit the nurturing parent state. Oh, baby, it's okay. You don't have to cry. And so even at a young age, baby's starting to manipulate for these feelings and be able to make them happen. As well, baby could have another reaction, and this starts to show up around 2 years old and exists for the rest of our lives, is the rebel. So when the critical parent comes out, the rebel goes, fuck you, I'm going to do what I want. So if you look at this model, this is the nurturing model. The adult that we talked about earlier doesn't really play out here. Because see, the adult is a facts and figures machine. And when I'm in a world of persuasion and leadership, I'm actually wanting to move through feeling. And if you remember, I was talking about complementary positioning, right? And in complementary positioning, in this particular situation, the nurturing parent solicits the natural child position. So when I come through life as a nurturing parent, as I talk to people tenderly, I listen to them, I understand them, I give them that feeling of importance. And it's genuine. I do not do it with people I do not want to do it with. It's genuine, it's authentic. And when I do that, it makes them feel like they're in the natural child state. They can't help but that complementary position. I have done this in all kinds of situations. I've been dealing with the police when I've done this. I've dealt with hostile customers when I've done this. I've dealt with hostile drunks when I've done this. This is an extremely powerful tool and concept to understand complementary positioning. So, for example, if I happen to be out protesting and I get snagged, right? And I go, fuck you, buddy, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. What's he gonna do? He'll beat my ass. But if I go, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, you got the wrong person. I didn't know this isn't who I am. You're so much smarter than I. Hopefully you're going to be able to help me out. And I take a different position. Can you help me? I'm going to solicit a nurturing parent from him. If I take a natural child position, and even maybe a helpless child position, I'm going to solicit a natural, or I mean a nurturing parent from them. People, unfortunately, are more prone to reaction than action. But that's fortunate for us, because that means in situations we're able to make things work for us. So, let's see, does bias have to do with perceived notion? Sorry, I just saw this. Alex Pretsky, does bias have to do with preconceived notion? Yes, it does, Alex. So preconceived notion is a type of bias, let's say, that, well, I would call a preconceived notion a belief, right? And I most certainly would test it out as well as I could. Meaning this, the scientific method, right? I mean, when you say preconceived notion, it could fall into a world of different biases, but the idea is that, I obviously have a belief that if it's a preconceived notion, meaning that it's like before it has any reason to actually, it was made off assumptions, right? And too many times we don't use the scientific method in our own feelings. So rather than trying to go prove my feeling right, if I have a preconceived notion, I'm going to try to prove it wrong. And if I can prove it wrong, then I know it's not effective theory. If I can't prove it wrong, then I know for currently it's an effective theory. So this really can play out in the, yes, your biases do create preconceived notions. Let's put it that way. That's how preconceived notions get created, is through biases. And so I'm going to close today's talk with a couple exercises. One of them is, if you can throughout the day, try to identify, hang on, I just got another question. Switching to that position in the protest situation sounds like a Stockholm, well, I don't, so yes, so if Stockholm Syndrome, so Alex asked if switching to the position, meaning that the natural child position in the protest situation, and he's asking, is that'd be like Stockholm Syndrome? It would be, in the sense that Stockholm Syndrome is happening without any purpose, but like without any, not on purpose, right? Whereas what I'm doing is I'm purposely positioning myself to solicit a different emotion in the person I'm dealing with. So I wouldn't say that it's Stockholm Syndrome. It might look like it, but I think Stockholm Syndrome is the idea that you don't have an actual choice at that point, but to be sort of in love with your captors. So I think that may help. If it doesn't, let me know. So self-talk exercise. Well, there's two. First of all, identify the ego state that you might be in. So as you're going through the day and you happen to be talking with someone, and if you wake up to the moment and realize, hey, what ego state am I in? There's actually an exercise of trying to wake up in the moment here. And we're going to go into next class, we're going to go into some techniques that will help that. But as maybe it'll be while you're thinking about a conversation you had previously, or getting ready to have a conversation with someone. You know how we all do that. We'll try to relive the conversation, or we'll rework it out, or we'll work it out before we have it. Well, look to see what ego states that you're putting the people in your mind. Look at the ego state that you happen to be in the situation. Or if you happen to wake up in a moment, look at what ego state. Are you in a parent ego state? Are you in an adult ego state? Or are you in a child ego state? The other exercise I would suggest I would do is self-talk. Man, I'm going to tell you what. So going back to the controlling parents, and a lot of us had controlling parents. In some ways it was good, very structured and organized. In some ways it was bad. It was sort of this critical parent kind of thing going on. And I know for myself that and two older brothers had created a lot of negative self-talk. And I had to really break down that self-talk that was going on in my mind. And I had to hear what was happening is, let's say I made a mistake, or at the time it would be a fuck up. And I'd be mad at myself. I'd be like, you're so stupid. You shouldn't be, And I had to just sort of start forgiving myself. I would catch myself, I would make a mistake, I would catch myself beating myself over it. Then I'd go, no, 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 you just made a mistake, it's okay. I mean, if I can't allow myself to make a mistake, how am I going to allow anyone else to make one? But more importantly, that self-talk that goes on is really, really detrimental to your operation status. And as we walk through this transactional analysis a little deeper, I'm going to show you how to start to unravel some of that self-talk. But really taking a look at that self-talk that you have going in. Are you being supportive of yourself? Are you being, detracting? What is it that's going on, and what ego state are you in while you're doing it? So this week really is, this month, if you can, and I'm always available, you can reach out to me if you have further questions. But when really it's about sort of living in your head a little bit, taking an inventory and seeing what's going on in there. Not anything really, I don't want you to be judgmental. If you catch yourself beating yourself, I don't want you to go, oh, I'm so stupid for beating myself. Don't beat yourself for beating yourself, right? But at the same time, we want to be able to start to have an inventory, start to see how we're talking to ourselves on the inside and see what's going on. So it's really, really, these two, they don't require a lot of energy. If you want to journal about them, that would even be better, but you're not required to. But see if you can make the effort this month. And again, if you need me, you most certainly can reach out to me.